This will be BTWRLM 315. Getting some faulty crickets? Are the crickets going faulty? Are they starting to be quiet and get active? I don't think so. And before I go on and you all say, well, but you've helped me, and I hear that a lot, and that encourages me a lot. Hearing that you use the stuff I provide for you to help yourself out in ways that you hadn't thought before. That's what partly, in a lot of a part that I use to keep coming back. And I don't know what else to do. There's another part that says I don't know what else to do because I have to keep coming back because there's a reason that's coming on us that we better be prepared for. And I'm going to be able to. I want to be able to say that I'm trying my best to get everyone ready. Now you're all being real resistant, but I don't know what to do about that part, except to keep coming back and keep being what I need to be. Giving you the examples based in what we call news, what is actually a notice. And so, my problem with all of this is not just that I'm absolutely thrilled I can help people who understand, start to believe, and listen to me long enough to use what I'm saying and approach things. What my problem is that we have a bigger problem. We have a much bigger problem. And we're still stuck on solving our own things, which we have to do. I mean, this is the problem, one of the other dimensional problems. We have to do all that. And if we don't, then, we get consumed that way. We get just obliterated that way. But we have a bigger problem. And the bigger problem is this life thing, this occupational thing, this military thing that we tend to not focus on. And we're so outside of unaware, a lot of awarenesses, actually. And our agreement to a lot of this comes in stages. It doesn't come in knowledge. It comes in steps as we'll accept the things. And so what people call awoke is just it's a joke. It's just the next. It's the what I say. It's just where you are relative to what is out there. What is the next thing for you to do and be into? And that's why I can look through with all my experience going in and saying, well, hey, there's a whole lot bigger game going on, bigger play that keeps us bound. And I'm seeing now that I have a low volume. Okay, folks, I think I'm back. I don't know what my volume is. If I can get a sound check. Folks, I think I have a problem generally, so I'm going to go back and just start doing the broadcast. I'm raising my one volume level that I can, but it may put some noise in this thing. And so if we could keep going, I'll just put something together. This will be a longer post-production, which I try not to do. It's so many hours to put this together. But as I was saying, I try to bring you things to help you, and you've communicated to me that you have over the years, and I'm really appreciative to know that I'm helping those of you that are listening and applying the things. And again, as we were talking about, we were at the mining district meeting this week, and we were again talking about how we address a lot of these things. It really boils down to this record making. So many things can be resolved up front by making the proper record. And yeah, okay, so folks, it sounds like I'm lower than normal, but it's apparently clear. So I'm going to go with this, and in the post-production, if anybody's listening now, don't download the Spreaker because it's going to be messed up, and I'll have to put something together. It'll just put this all back together to make a broadcast out of it. But so we're going to, and I'm not sure about the timing either. Anyway, there's going to be some problems on this one, but we'll put it all together and see what we can do. I guess if you're listening, Jules, maybe this broadcast is going to be short because I don't know how this is going to splice together at all with all the time I've spent going on, and it's going to cut off. I think it'll cut off at the right time. So I'll have 5-10 minutes of dead space, and I'm not going to be able to fill. That's going to ruin the timing on the other end for anybody that does syndication, rebroadcast, or pastcast. So, getting on to the point, so I'm always glad to hear that you're using what I'm saying and you help it, and a lot of that's just making a proper record and really getting inside, understanding the system's not there to help you. It's given itself license to help itself, and you really have to be vigilant, literally vigilant on your rights and know what they are. And it's not a thing you can do in ignorance. Now, that said, we're trained to be ignorant. That said, we have no excuse for it. So I don't come here just to tell you, here, you got to do this because that's good for you. No, this is the world that's set up against us. And I don't know how to respond to that better than what I'm telling you each week. So I appreciate, and you do give me inspiration to continue. Those of you that hear it, I know that if you listen long enough, you will be helped. I hear it I can see it, I can work with people, I know that's the case, but I want us to look at the fact and the problem. We have these problems, and especially the ignorant side, when we find out we didn't know how to respond to the world, essentially the government and the agencies, because that's really our biggest problem, it seems. That should have been your first clue. There's a bigger thing going on. And while we were all focused on that and just figuring that out, there's been this thing going on. However, however you want to describe it, I can put it in a couple of packages. We can call it the military occupation. We can call it the foreigners. We can call it the corporatocracy, where we look at the Bar Association as an association running your states in all branches and then denying that they have any conflict of interest. It's amazing what they'll get people to believe and how we'll just sit there and watch it. We have a bigger problem over and above our own problems. I say find a wrong, even a small one, to make it right, because you need to start flexing your vigilant rights muscle, if you will, and learn how to do it more properly. I can't explain to you how to do that until you start doing it. So I've reduced this whole thing down to just find a wrong and work on it. Get it worked out. Once you get that worked out, you're going to see things as you work through that are going to bring on a bigger awareness. You'll also now have to see different techniques that you'll bring and incorporate that you started with that you'll have to build upon. And so then together, if we're all talking together, we'll then be able to work with each other on their different things. I work so much better on a subject matter than I do just making stuff up. And in part, the news I tell you, this notice that we get, is making stuff up. What it does is it gives me an ability to tell you, listen, here's a wrong. Anybody can step up, can any of you step up to help this? It's really more of a request. If you can't do it, if you can't, or you're not interested, then don't do it. You got to get something that you're passionate about. I can know, because when it comes down to beating you down, you got to have something to hold on to in what looks to be darkest hours that you have to keep pushing through until you literally vanquish that oppressor that's sitting there. Let me get on to something that just came up today, and it just, like I said in my response, it's a disappointment, but it's a truth. I can't do much more about it. It was this someone who apparently doesn't listen behind the woodshed, and this is part of my answer, that went to, let me just read their stuff, go on an international flight and found out that they're doing what we say in the news here, that they're going on. I just boarded an international JetBlue flight. Instead of scanning my boarding pass or handing over my passport, I looked into a camera before being allowed down the jet bridge. Did facial recognition replace boarding passes, unbeknownst to me? Did I consent to this? The answer from JetBlue was, this is going through Twitter now, if you don't think this is an interesting and powerful tool, they answer, you were able to opt out of this procedure, Mackenzie. Sorry if this made you feel uncomfortable. Mackenzie answers, follow-up question. Presumably these facial recognition scanners are matching my image to something in order to verify my identity. How does JetBlue know what I look like? JetBlue answers, the information is provided by the United States Department of Homeland Security for existing holdings. Well, that word's interesting. So the response from someone else who saw this interaction says, yikes. Not surprising, but yikes. Now, I looked at that and I said, I'm disappointed. I said, and I wrote a response back. It disappoints me to see this. Had people listened behind the woodshed, they would have heard about this years ago and of what to do about it. People apparently enjoy the drama of their imprisonment rather than breaking the intangible chains binding them. Silent weapons for quiet wars. Now, any of you that have listened to me, see, that's a consistent statement I've said for years. All this stuff I just said. I am disappointed. What have I said? How do you address this? I've said how to address this. I'm not going to go through it. I did, except to remind you, this is an administrative addressment, and I've told you how to address them, especially now that you know this, the Homeland Security is involved against that war of terror against you, and they've stolen the presumption of innocence on top of a bunch of other things that you bring administratively, and challenging the least amount of consequence you have to do to your rights. My disappointment is all these years there's still evidence that people are rather just looking around like it's a joyride, and then be surprised one day. Didn't even know that she had consented to it or not. JetBlue answering, well, you could have opted out. I wonder, was there a big red stop sign that said you could opt out? So notice everybody about that. And then was there a disclosure when you opted out how roughly you would be treated by these criminals? And so today I walked into this one. It was a little bit of disappointment with regard to seeing this. And this is a truth. I mean, they're not going to. Who's interested to listen to my broadcast? There's not very many people anyway. And then the promotion, I just don't have any. And there's not much of a thing when you're getting sequestered away and censored or shadow banned or whatever's going on. But I've been around long enough that people should be at least coming by and periodically listening and picking up tools and responding and integrating and all kinds of stuff with what's going on. There's enough trouble out there. It's a target-rich environment. I've been saying that for years. But to see this, it's not unknown. It's like no difference than what the response was from this. It's yikes, not surprising, but yikes. That's what I'm saying. But in the concept of, well, this is your yikes is that it's happening. I'm saying you could have stopped it. Where have you been? And so if you have, we may have these problems in our lives where the government's beating down on us, and we have to solve our problems, whether you go to court or a bill, something coming as a bill, and maybe you're not getting the services that you paid for on something, or whatever the thing is, and you need to protect yourself. That's one thing, but this is a bigger thing coming. You're not free, especially JetBlue. You're not free to move about the country, folks, and they have this database already set up. Now, the answers in this was, with the passport, you would have had to give it a picture. And so that would be within the capacity of the home rule. But so I don't know where else we go, because they do have a picture and they can do it, but that people are completely clueless to this prison that they're in and have been. And they're just concerned. They just don't like it. They have another question, but they don't have any action. And so I'm a lot concerned here for us. It goes beyond me saying that you find it wrong to make right, just however small. That's just to get you to start exercising your response muscle, to be vigilant against the things that they're either not telling us, or they're failing to disclose, or just lying to us about. In fact, I think it came through a chat, a link, this thing on the border. There was an arrest of some guy in a militia. The big secret they're trying to cover up, they got the guy for something other than when they claim in the title was an illegal detention or kidnapping of the people coming across the border. They want to hide the fact that you have the right of citizen's arrest by pointing out they had to get this guy the leader of this militia, on a different thing than what the title said was an illegal kidnapping. See, it's not if you make a correct citizen's arrest. And so this is how the propaganda machine works against us. And if you aren't well enough versed in this thing, you get talked right out of your rights and the things you have the right to do. And remember, I'm not sitting here without knowing about what the FBI can do in this regard. Well, we attempted, as a mining district, to arrest a couple people in the government over their trust abuses in the Secretary of Interior's office, and I can't remember if the Forest Service on the agriculture side. The FBI came looking for our chairman. And boy, weren't they surprised about this citizen's arrest right. They argued with him until we produced the code. So you got to have the word in your mouth. I told you nothing happened since then after we presented that. But they thought they were going to come and rifle him up, just like they're doing this guy on the border. I'm not even talking about the right or wrong on the border and what they're doing. I'm saying what you're not hearing about is what you can see in the stories is that everybody does not like the militia utilizing their right to citizen's arrest. And again, you don't abuse that. But they're not saying it's illegal, even though the titles say so. So My objective behind the Woodshed is to teach you the principles of what to look through and how to see that those rights that you all complain about not being recognized are ones that you're just not putting up. You're not putting forward and pressing on. And there's a game going on, and you don't enter you don't even enter the Coliseum, and they play the game without you. And you say you're too busy. Well, this is the existence of your freedom. This is how it's been taken away. That's the game that's up. And at any rate, so I just look at what I wrote. I'm disappointed, folks. Not a judgment. We're not going to. This isn't happening, folks. If we don't get beyond ourselves, if we all keep arguing amongst ourselves and keep letting them get away with the misinformation, letting them away with, well, it'll come up here if I get to it, with the Smith-Munt amendment, that they can lie to you. I mean, again, all these are pointing that you don't live in the country you thought. You live in a prison. They can tell you whatever you want. You can complain about it, or you can do what you're supposed to do and step up. And so, I guess enough on that. I can wallow in my misery over this disappointment. I sure can. Anyway, so one thing that I've been talking to you about and making an alternative to all this is making the alternative. And it's coming out that I've mentioned it before. And again, because I talk through the news, I'm really not talking about anything you may have heard somewhere else. What I'm pointing out is really how to reinterpret what you're seeing we call news is notice, and that they're telling you that if you don't respond to this, we're going to take it that you accept. That is your consent. What did the other girl talk about not consent? Well, she bought a ticket, didn't understand the underlying authorities that were now all over that she had to deal with administratively. Okay, I don't like it. No one likes to do that, but that's folks, if you dread doing that means you're living in terrorism. It's that simple. The system of government that requires you to dread and deal with their impositions that you can show are not really lawful, and presumptions that take away your lawful character, your lawful obligations, and impose other things that are not, and cause punitive harms upon you without any due process at all, is a government that rules by dread. Is a terror. Fear is a terror. That's terrorism. And so when I say this stuff behind the Woodshed all the time, I'm just not talking and spouting. I'm actually just going through definitions. Maybe not as many as I should. Maybe not explaining the jurisdictional aspects of each different definition. And I see so many people mashing up all this stuff instead of breaking it down and start looking at it. But at any rate, so there's a subtle way that I approach this different, absolutely different than most people appreciate. To me, that's just a matter of reading the right things and understanding the consequences of what you're reading, bringing them into importance, and not using really any excuse. Well, when you are feeling that you've been violated, you likely have. You're not stupid. You're not unsensible. You really have only been told how to be complacent. That just takes breaking the complacency. Stop being silent. But do it when you act. You do it in the proper way. And not even get grief about what proper. Well, if it's proper, I'm accepting that. Well, no, there's a way that you do things. If you do it wrong, anything wrong, it isn't going to come out to the thing you want. If you don't want to make a plan to build a house, I guess you could be talented enough to make a house without plans. But we know that it's better to have a plan. And it's better to go by a certain form once you work out that form is safe and sane, if you will. It also gives us the time to think about how we're going to go through. But there's a communication standards that are going on. If you don't think there is, you haven't even looked at heraldry at all to understand that this is a long stay. Formality is very important. It's not the substance, which is what you're focused on, but if you come completely out of left field on what you do, no one sees you. They don't have to recognize it. And so, going and moving through what I was telling you, we have to start creating this distinction and difference. Well, I've been just to hit this and move on. It's been hitting the news. We've talked about it behind the Woodshed, but again, something that came up I want to remind you of. Will gold standard make a comeback soon as nations losing trust in fiat money? Well, this is an opinion. I wanted to point out it doesn't matter to me what the opinion is. It doesn't, and the title doesn't matter whether or not gold makes a standard. There's a gold standard that happens. What you need to know is that nations are moving to something substantial and moving from the fiat. This is the word to the wise. People that are not tied to the United States are being attacked by it now because of this very same thing, are moving to substance. moving to the gold and essentially silver. That'll work as well. And there's a notice right here as a so-called opinion. This is the alternative I've been telling you about that sits there. I'm not a genius about this. This is even constitutional. I just take it for what it is and put an application. If we move from the standard that was constitutional and you keep working in the stuff that's non-constitutional, why do you complain there's no constitution? And I'm not saying that getting back is easy, but I'm saying it's necessary. And so we're going to have to really go into that. If the nations now are showing you the way, there's intelligent people working behind this. They're not doing this as a nation. Remember, they all have their national security. They're not doing this to put themselves in jeopardy. But here it made and this is a while back. This is old news. I just brought it up. I can't get to all this stuff. So we have alternatives to decide on. We have a choice. There's a fork in the road every day. And we're going to make that choice. And you can make excuses for making the wrong choice or of giving in to a lesser, a mediocre approach. Or you can take the responsibility up that you would hear about behind the woodshed. And we would know behind the woodshed is what normally would happen, to give a principle in the forward. Going forward about how you work and look at the world, because if you don't, you're either going to hurt someone or they're going to hurt you. See, again, this this two-edged sword that goes on. But here it is. Will gold standard make a comeback soon? I'm saying forget that. It's mutually exclusive from the fact that the nations are moving from fiat and moving into gold themselves. And so we got to look a little deeper on all this. I want to remind everybody, those of you that are thinking of it, if we can get more people to do it that way, we're going to build an independent, a non-dependent alternative to the existing control structure. And you're dealing in property there, as I keep saying. That's the most important thing in my mind. And then we get back to what I keep saying. It makes it simpler to look at when you deal with it in property instead of, it's some weird word like specie or money or something that's legal, can become legalistic really fast. When you go into property, it either is or it's intangible property, and it's just yours or it isn't. And any man or woman can speak on how. And so things are gold, or not golden. That's the other legalistic. We have a golden coin. No, it's not gold. This is how they do it. Simple little addition of 2 letters. And so, one of the things that gold, you would think they were gold in your life, things of value, are taken as a privilege to charge you. One quick little segue here. Another Twitter came through that was exposing how the name is Bucky the Good Arm. Universal Health Care now shows us a receipt. Apparently, he had got a new child coming in, new baby came into the world, and there was a line item on his bill, itemized statement of services, skin to skin after a C-section. So now we know the procedure. If you want to touch your baby after it's delivered into the world, it's going to cost you $39.35. Think about that. If you don't think you're not a commodity, your wants are charged and taxed and whatever all else that goes on there. Just to touch your own baby after a C-section became a procedure to charge you $39. And this is the legalistic world that you live in. There's nothing natural to men and women. These are just indications to me, notices. We can disregard all of it. Or we can understand that something has taken over this world and completely outside of our control. And this is where I keep telling you, you're going to have to it sounds stupid, but you're going to have to make laws on what is okay. That's already okay. Then, fascinating. Skin to skin after C-section cost them $40 to touch the baby. Apparently lay it on the mother's chest or belly. Amazing what they'll do and what we accept and what we can't. Nothing to balance this out on. And that $39 is going down in value. It's a fiat currency. We'll see another article if I get to it. 80% of the value's been gone since 71. Now you know how that number keeps going down. How do you come to the point where you continue? It's like, I guess you can never reach the bottom when you have something. It's just that we live on less and less and less, and it looks like we think it costs more and more. I was just looking at some prices for some things, and I'm a little bit out of touch. I don't buy much, so I don't get into too many things and building projects like I used to. But I was shocked to look at some of the parts. The cost of parts that used to be a few dollars are now 3 and 4 and 5 times that. certainly can't be because of the cost to make it. It costs more. By 10 years later, they produce so many of these same things that you think the cost would be nothing. And when you look at the world, that's exactly, there's really not supposed to be much cost on what we do anymore, where people are pretty ingenious about making, if production was a value and it adversely was against cost, we would have things handed to us. But that's not the world. And so there's a control going on. Certainly if you were to go back to the gold and silver, you would see a more stabilized medium of exchange for what men and women do. And I say this particularly because they're dealing, fiat has to deal in legalisms, has to deal in legal entities. And there's so many ways that you do consent. And there's so many ways you accept, as the woman was saying, the girl was saying, how did I consent to this? Well, you used a fiat system to go into a transportation system, to go into a system that's been now presumed to be a threat to the nation, and then you were presumed to be an enemy combatant in that. And so, yeah, you consented by not questioning, not saying, wait a minute, I'm not any of that. And it's a harsh principle to understand. And I just don't know a way around it. I've never heard anybody that's ever come up with an idea on how you move around that, if you have any idea that you want to be free of it. And again, it's not of our making, except to the extent of our silence. And again, it's a case-by-case basis. So they tell you that it's down to each one of us. And I found out if you can band together with the proper answers, it becomes a lot harder for them to do much, because you are the resistance. You are the actual resistance, not by words and what you think, not by memes, but the actuality of it. And so we get into our belief systems, and I find this story coming up here is an interesting story here, which is, I think it backfires at my view because of the subject matter. It comes from Salon.com, and if I understand right, it has to do. They might be considered a progressive website of progressive information, which this article speaks to, but I find interesting how people disregard themselves in the problem that they see. It's this mental illness that I find. It's like this climate change. All so-called humans are a cause of the harm, and yet the people that make that statement forget they're also so-called human. And this is the disconnect for me. But this is apparently a study. Scientists, and remember now, any more of these seem to be political lobbyists. So it's easy to start looking through this when you see it, but for those of us that are deemed to be of any kind of a religiosity, a legalism, where you don't think you're in a religion, but someone puts you there, and you're going to find out that so-called progressives can be put there pretty quickly in their belief systems. It's just a belief system link. When we look at this title, they put it in religion. And no different than they might focus this guy on the border on his, supposedly he's a felon in possession of weapons, instead of when they say in the title that it's illegal to arrest people, you don't have the right of citizen's arrest. They do the same thing with this term religion. People don't realize what's being covered over. It could be all kinds of stuff. They say religious fundamentalism. They'll just say any fundamentalism, apparently. By this statement, a scientist established a link between religious fundamentalism and brain damage, coming out right during the time of Easter and all that kind of stuff, and all this other thing that's going on with all the churches being bombed and all this kind of interesting attack, all in the time of the 420. Some of you all rejoice over it. Other people die. Interesting dynamic. But scientists established a link between religious fundamentalism and brain damage. A study published in the Journal of Neurophysiology has shown that religious fundamentalism is, in part, the result of functional impairment in a brain region known as the prefrontal cortex. The findings suggest that damage to particular areas of the prefrontal cortex indirectly promotes religious fundamentalism by diminishing cognitive flexibility and openness, a psychology term that describes a personality trait which involves dimensions like curiosity, creativity, and open-mindedness. Religious beliefs can be thought of as socially transmitted mental representations that consist of supernatural events and entities assumed to be real. Religious beliefs differ from empirical beliefs. Restate that one, because this is the big net. The writers of this, the authors of this, and the scientists who study this forgot how big this net can go. Religious beliefs differ from empirical beliefs, which are based on how the world appears to be and are updated as new evidence accumulates and when new theories with better predictive power emerge. On the other hand, religious beliefs are not usually updated in response to new evidence or scientific explanations, and are therefore strongly associated with conservatism. They are fixed and rigid, which helps promote predictability and coherence to the rules of society among individuals within the group. Religious fundamentalism refers to an ideology that emphasizes traditional religious texts and rituals and discourages progressive thinking about religion and social issues. Fundamentalist groups generally oppose anything that question or challenge their beliefs or way of life. For this reason, they are often aggressive towards anyone who does not share their specific set of supernatural beliefs and towards science, as these things are seen as existential threats to their entire worldview. Since religious beliefs play a massive role in driving and influencing human behavior throughout the world, it is important to understand the phenomenon of religious fundamentalism from psychological and neurological perspective. I'll end right there. There's more to say. I want to go back and I want to remind you all, and to cut through this nonsense of labeling and conservatism, and they want to show in religion as a religious fundamentalism that let's just expand this to any fundamentalist belief. And they want to say that this is a conservatism thing versus a progressive thing. And I want to point to you on this one point that means that progressivism is conservative. And don't they promote that conservation? How am I going to do that? Well, isn't it true that there is something called a green religion, universally acknowledged as being such, a green religion that purports to worship the environment and, more importantly, Gaia. And these people will call anybody who does not believe their belief a heretic. And they put it in a cause. They'll declare our death over what? Something that they've invented called climate change. And so, to me, I'm trying not to put judgment on any side. We're being destroyed at all extremes, however they call it fundamentalism. It's not. And yet, right here, we see that this writer, writing on a progressive page, talking that the people who don't use science are conservatives, and that we can reduce it down to religious fundamentalism, don't actually realize they can be, by their own systems, looked at the same way. In fact, we all can. If you look through what they've done with so-called climate change or anthropomorphic global warming, you'll see that their science is not science at all. You'll see it's a big fraud. It's not a hoax, folks. It's a fraud. It's a supernatural fraud. They don't even believe in the sun. I mean, come on. I mean, this is really nonsense. And so, they call themselves progressives. They are into conservatism. It's in conservation or non-use of the creation that they're even living in. It's like they condemn themselves in their own thoughts. And I found this study, this report, more just interesting, that we can look at it for its facial explanation. We can use it as a finger pointing to people that are apparently not religiously fundamental. Yet we can expand find out what religious fundamentalism in the context of a firmly held belief, based in the facts of what they said here, that we're inflexible in lack of openness, and you can apply that right to a progressive cause called anything progressive so-called anymore, but in particular climate change. It's known it comes from the green religion. I don't have the problem now that it's a fundamental religious belief, and that they will not agree with anybody that doesn't believe in what they say and doesn't believe in how it's supposed to work. And if you do have a problem, they'll call you a heretic and ask for your death. And how many reports have I done on a few of the reports I've done behind the woodshed? Here's an interesting study for us here. And this is the so-called relativistic world. And this is what what the progressives work on. There is no foundation. It's partly why I thought behind the woodshed, where we were, at least ostensibly believe, the principles were applied when we were kind of disregarding those, and to give us a better goal in the world, would be what I was combating in the world of when I was looking at all this, seeing that these are the people, these people that don't acknowledge themselves as religious fundamentalists, in fact are, and they are doing exactly what they condemn in people that they point their finger at. Three-pointing back, easy for me, that this broadcast is trying to point out to everybody. Part of it is, I want to stop the division. Now, it's not going to be able to happen, but it's not going to happen because of our innate natural our natural hate for each other, essentially, when we get right down to it. How small those divisions can be created. But it doesn't matter. I'm going to hope that we can come together. In other words, we come together because it's a bigger problem against all of us. But so it's not going to be 100%. I already know that. But hopefully we get a lot more of us pulling together and doing the right thing. Enough, anyway, to stop this nonsense. You have brain damage if you have a fundamentalist belief by this study. Well, if I can point at the so-called conservatives that are the ones that they're pointing at, and then also point at them by the same standard, then we're all kind of nuts, aren't we? I think it's time to get beyond that. We're all nuts. Now we better work together as being completely insane. How are we going to do that? It's kind of like almost an impossible task, but we're going to have to overcome that as well. And I find interesting, too, when you see this story that religious fundamentalism is evidence of brain damage. Now remember, I'm not talking religion. I'm talking about any firmly held belief system. You've been shown to have problems in your brain, and I wonder, well, what's the cause of all that? Anyway, we don't even look at it. See, we can look past the problem. Okay, well, if that's the case, and now I've just pointed out, likely most of us are suffering from this fundamentalist view. It doesn't matter what your political persuasion, then maybe we're all brain damaged. But what's the cause? What I find interesting, the fundamentalist view is being protected by the DHS. In this little story, I'm bringing it up from when I didn't get to it for a while back. DHS offers grants to churches for security upgrades. This has a twofold interest for me. So they're going to, apparently these mentally defective people are being protected. The DHS wants them protected, and it had announced a request starting in April 12th to 16th, which we just missed, for grants to be used to upgrade the security of facilities of nonprofits such as churches and religious schools to deal with the continuing threat of violence against such institutions because of their ideological beliefs or missions, which that study, the scientific study says, is a mental illness. And so I found that fascinating, but let's look at it a little bit more in this Christmas weekend. Christmas. It's all the same fraud. Easter weekend. They did this right before we're hearing of the attack on the churches. And so that's why I even reminded myself of this. This is so far down the path of my tabs. I just brought it up from last night. I find it very interesting that before we've seen the attacks, that they were making a narrow window appeal for the churches to realign themselves if they hadn't already done it. Their pastors weren't already inculcated into this thing long ago, back in the 90s, that they were asking for them to ask for grants to do security before we're seeing the attacks on the churches. And Congress has already been ahead of this. So, I don't know more than to say, how did they know to start focusing on this now after all these years, given all the promise of the problems that they were going to have and solve back in 2001, 9/11, that all of a sudden is popping out now, and then we see the world is kind of against, has developed, the attacks have exploded, if you will, against in this week, particularly the Catholic Church. And that's got a whole other history, which I've talked about. I'm not going to get into it. So what's the government doing here weeks ahead of this attack week? Saying, hey, you're going to need to be protected. And understand that's the government coming in under contracts that's going to do surveillance on top of it. And so this is, I think, a bigger story here that kind of went underneath the radar a bit. As I start seeing this other story come in that says that these religious fundamentalism is a mental illness, if you will. It's a defect in the machine. And then the other thing, that if you're not open, then maybe you're a defect. Well, folks, you can't be open to just about everything. you have to have the principles. Again, I'm back to the behind which our idea of what that would bring. You have to have a foundation from which you're working. Not no foundation, or not one that's faulty, or not one that's based on just myths and ideas. Certainly not any that deny how we got here at all. And that takes a little bit of study, and then how do you know all that? I mean, you only know what you know at that point. And so, DHS offers grants to churches for security upgrades. Was weeks and weeks ago, just before we have a problem with the bombings of churches and stuff. And I'm just wondering, Congress had already set the money, the appropriation of money for that ahead of time. What's going on there? I don't know. Just interesting. Now we move on to, as I was telling you before and mentioned earlier, you have the requirement now to make laws in the states where they can to check the excesses of the federal and or even the states themselves, where you wouldn't think that you'd have to, where it would think that why do you have to even make a law that says things like that? Isn't that dumb? And I've been telling you, yeah, you're going to have to make laws that sound dumb, that give you the right to have your rights. And then it's going to be to every right that you have. I mean, it's just really nonsense. And I haven't figured out a resolve to that other than doing this for the time being until that this time too shall pass. But Texas comes up with a bill now which would increase vaccine safety by rejecting a federal narrative. And what they're doing is a bill is introduced in Texas Senate would prohibit vaccines from being administered unless certain safety criteria are met. So this metastasizing cancer that's spreading across the country, that's actually a terrorism, the war of terror across and going into the churches, and the churches then being houses of a bunch of mentally defective people, that the people who say that are also mentally defective because they have their own stringently held belief systems that they tend to believe they don't have, keeps working its way through. That we need to have vaccines against the people that are giving us the vaccines of destruction. The cure becomes the destructive force here. You want to have a war of terror, you don't realize, you think it's a war on terror, and pretty soon and you don't realize that's the cancer, a Trojan horse, or if you will, from a different angle, but you don't know that you should be inoculating yourself against it. I'm saying behind the woodshed, inoculate yourself. And you're going to need to be building your own vaccine against these opportunists and these plunderers and these occupiers. So the state of Texas is coming up to try and put a check on this overriding position of vaccination theory. Again, just theory. A bill introduced in Texas Senate would produce vaccines from being administered unless certain safety criteria are met. Passage of the bill would significantly straighten vaccine safety testing requirements and push back against any future federal vaccine mandates. So this is the first paragraph. I won't read more. You can read it if you're interested. I think you should go back and read this. This is what I was telling you. You have to start bringing, if you will, safe and sane legislation in to check what's going on. This is going to have a little bit of a challenge, being that it's a federal mandate. They have their administrative checks in there that it's going to be preparing the way to say that it's okay. And so this is going to have to be written very carefully if they're going to explain that you're now is a time when there has to be a law written that you have the right to challenge whether or not any particular vaccine is safe. Your state can do that. And you have to, because there's no one looking out for you. And if we live in that republic, this is exactly how the state would work. The state would work to protect you. And this is not saying you don't get the vaccine. This is prohibiting vaccines from being administered without a standard of safety testing. And so again, you look at very carefully, this is an evidence of one of those bills you would think that you would have the right to reject, you would have the right to say no, you would have the right of investigation, you have the right of disclosure, you'd have the right to the final decision that it wouldn't be handed over to the government itself and its own licensees with a monopoly of plunder. But no, there's evidence that you have to have this sort of bill, and if you don't, you're going to be susceptible to the imposition by the state. And you're going to see 2 states now are doing that and taking away this ability to go and have this, what Texas has done. You'd think that the DHS would be all over this by saying, well, it's a national security threat when you don't get your vaccines, but they're not. And so Texas is coming up. I hope this, I haven't read the bill, don't have the time. I've been really overwhelmed on lots of stuff, trying to pull through it all, but you actually need to read this bill, make sure, think about it, and make the check in your local states, because no one's looking out for you. No one is maintaining your right of choice. They're throwing it underneath an imperative, even though they admit, and it can be found now much easier, and I didn't say easily, or easily, much easier, that you need to have these checks in legislation. It's a stupid condition, STOOPID, but I don't know what else to do about that right now. If you don't, you're going to be harmed. And the do-gooders that don't believe that they're a problem, that they have these religious, these things become highly, strictly held beliefs, that they're not open to the fact that maybe there's a harm. This is a mental illness. I told you this a couple of weeks ago, that I think it's looking more and more that the people that insist on mandatory vaccines, or anything mandatory, and in this case vaccines, because we now know that it does do harm. We now know that it does cause cognitive damage, and we do know that abuse brings in the idea of helping the abuser. That these people that are advocating for mandatory vaccines, despite all the warnings that are even in the product data sheet. So I'm not going too far. It's right there in their own data sheet and their own findings. When these people are brain damaged and they're abusers because they're abused, and they're trying to bring that abuse to you, should be a line of thread of thought and construction to utilize the power that you have to protect yourself against them. So this Texas bill, I think, is starting to go more what I've been saying. You're going to have to start giving yourselves the right. And I know it's a lot of work. Again, I just think about that. I just want to give up. Why do we have to do this? But it's necessary, because if we don't, there's people out there that want to harm you. They're mentally, cognitively dysfunctional people in seats of power, the caucusocracy, making decisions that was good enough for them to be harmed. They want to make sure everybody gets harmed by it. And we want to understand some of these things. John Rappaport brings up another thing on vaccines, like he does, toxic aluminum in vaccines. I hope the aluminum, an ingredient in many vaccines, keeps moving up the chart of key issues in vaccine wars. The mainstream medical forces believe they can ward off any critiques. They're wrong, but the exposure to the truth has to keep escalating. He's absolutely right. You folks have to, those of you that are interested in this, have to step up and start bringing it up. Bring this problem that's not actually adequately tested, that the imposition of this as a mandatory is actually being made by people that are harmed by it and can't see it. And because of their fundamentalist beliefs, we know that their brain has been damaged by these things. So what did I just do? I just tied together a news item to you, how you tie it together in attacking these people that are coming to bring harm against you. If you don't, they're there to bring harm against you. And again, like I said, we got word in 2 states. One this morning just came up. 2 more states make it mandatory that you're going to be harmed. They're going to make you like them. Anybody with a fundamentalist view like this has to have brain damage. I can now do the cause. It must be those vaccines they got in their injections they want you to get now. They want you to suffer the same fate. Now, if you want more information, again, I'll have some links in the blogcaster. Kim's back up. I think I got this maybe through a double retweet through Gary L. again. SB 277, Richard Pan lied to Senate. Joel Anderson, California, about aborted fetal cells, MRC5, WI38 used in MMR productions, the whole list. Dr. Offit says, yes, DNA from aborted fetal cells are in the vaccines. Don't remember a lethal injection. Years ago, he identified all that in. Talks about Robert Kennedy Jr. Being on the front end of trying to advance all this knowledge to people to help them. All of this is sitting there, all in a nice short tweet to gather up as evidence to go against these, what I would call brain-damaged people, because they hold the belief that everybody, it rises to a religious belief, a firmly held belief that's beyond, it's supernatural, that everyone must lose their rights and their powers against the vaccine, an unproven theory. That proves it again. See, if you start holding this out and making simple sentences about the condition without trying to worry that you have to explain so much, you can address a lot of this. And I'm talking about these, it just came out, the vaccines were coming up. It came up that this is very important. This is hurting and killing people. That I just put these together. This could be any subject matter. Again, as I've been talking to some people dealing with certain things. This is all the same. You address every problem pretty much the same from what I'm telling you. Once you learn the one method of approach, it's applicable in everything I've seen so far. Okay, so does that mean it's applicable everywhere? No, but so far everything I've seen it is. So be the one that finds the exception would thrill me to no end. Why? Because I know you're out there doing something with all this information that's never before been available to us as people for any subject matter. So anyway, go on and on with this. The nice little list of links for proof to show that these people that want mandatory, that Texas is right to challenge the safety and that they shouldn't be used until they can be shown to be safe, and or give the power of the decision back to the mother or father, not the doctor system, because that's again a belief system. It's also a monopolizing system against the power of your property rights and your decision-making power. That there's evidence here that what's up against you because of the damages that the vaccine caused that they'll deny, that mental damage is actually causing harm to you, and they want you to hurt. They want you to be harmed like them. And then how is this all possible? You can build more scenarios, Rap. I've told you about this problem with the microbes in your body. I also think this is a story that came back, I think a few years ago. Again, Gary L. popped it up in one of his tweets. I happened to see it. Microbes in the human body swap genes even across tissue boundaries, study indicates. And so this is opening up, if you look into the record of the vaccines or any of these things, even the pharmaceuticals, see, this expands over to all pharma and even chemistry. This is where the shocking thing to me was this epigenetic change, this real-time change by chemistry and biology that goes on in the system we have as a body. This study tells us that bacteria in the human body are sharing genes with one another at a higher rate than is typically seen in nature. Some of these genes appear to be traveling independent of their microbial hosts from one part of the body to another. Researchers report in this Journal of Scientific Reports. Findings are the result of the molecular data mining method initially conceptualized by Kyung-Mo Kim, a senior research scientist in Korea Polar Research Institute, University of Illinois Crop Sciences, and Carl R. Woese Institute of Genomic Biology professor Gustavo Gaetano Anoles developed the approach with his former student Arshan Nursa and Comset. Okay, on and on. The computationally challenging method allowed them to identify instances of horizontal gene transfer, the different transfer of genes between organisms outside of sexual or asexual production. So let me just address, when I read this stuff and I tell you that science is just a bunch of political nonsense, I'm going to say the same thing even if this is just a bunch of political nonsense. Here's the point about how you address it administratively. You bring this question, right or wrong in science actually, and you say, listen, this is what these people have found. The agency is supposed to look at this as the truth, whether or not this is truly the truth. I assume it is the truth because of what it's exposing and what I think nature does. This is something they also tell you that the science didn't know happens before, that they now know now, that these decisions have been made to give you all the things that are in your world today. Better living through chemistry, pharma, whatever, chemicals for food. Here is a computationally challenging method that identified horizontal gene transfer that they didn't even know exists, that has not been part of the equation when they are assigning risks, that is not part of the equation when states that are coming on to make these things mandatory are being understood. They do not understand these mechanisms. They haven't known, and yet they still want to make these things mandatory. Someone's going to have to step up. One of you people, or someone you know that you can tell, has to pull this stuff together and step up and say, you haven't studied enough. And I've been telling you over and over, when they said they've never noticed that before, that should be the top of your list. They've never known this before, and yet they're saying this stuff is safe. How can they? And if the agency, the federal, whatever the condition is, has to go to a third party they want to use as independent, you go to them too, and with the same letter copied, and you say, how, when you didn't know this, how are you making your answers correct and adequate in law relative to your submission, that the agency could rely upon it? You put that whole thing in question. Now, what did I mean, if you go back to that tape, that part of the tape just now, that's like a sentence. It's a sentence. It has, what, 25 words in it? You can't copy that and write it down and send it off? I mean, really, I don't know. At some point, I just thought about that. Why can't anybody just take what I'm saying and just go apply it? See what the response. Wasn't it be a cool experiment just to see the response? Anyway, here we have higher rate typically seen in nature. I don't know why even that would be a higher rate. They had a rate before, and that was okay relative to some pharmaceutical or pharma thing or chemical thing that they've been allowing onto as an agency for what? Profit, folks? This little report opens up quite a big potential can here, folks. And I don't understand. Again, I'm just disappointed there's not more people just rolling up their sleeves excited to use what at least I see. Why? And if I can't be the only one that sees this stuff. Gary L. posted it. It was printed. Some of Gary L. posted it, so he got it from somebody else. They thought it was interesting. So I see some interest in this thing. I found interest enough to talk to you for the last 5-10 minutes on this thing. This is a serious defect that's going on, that they are going to get you to take something, under some license, under some requirement, under some mandatory law, some mentally defective recipient of these very same things who's actually wanting to, Stockholm Syndrome has attacked them as well, has physically damaged minds that are making law. And it's not law either. Figure that one out. What is it, folks? It's policy. It's not law. But we can't defend ourselves from this. And I see this stuff. We find a higher rate. Well, what was the first rate? And that was acceptable? It's not my opinion that there's harms, even death in the product data sheet. This is not me making up the anti-vax. Do I want to suffer that? Do I want my little one to suffer that? Well, I should have that decision. But no, there's some, apparently, mentally defective people making policy that are going to force you to do that to yourself. And they don't know this thing. They don't know about this gene sharing. And I've talked about this report, folks. I've talked to you about it. I've already told you this is what happens and goes on. These are the unintended consequences as well, even within the gene. And so you're again, the government sits there. It's supposed to be sitting there to be this balance, I guess, between commerce and your health. And I've told you Title 50 sits there and says that when push come to shove, your health means nothing compared to what they consider to be relative to national security. And if it's the economy stupid, then that's what it's going to be. It's I get kind of sad just thinking about, again, disappointed. How is it that we see all this? I can point this out, and week to week, hardly anybody picks all this stuff up and does anything about it. We have a string. I'm building up to something, too, about these mandatory states. I'll come to them in a moment. I'm building up for you where Texas comes. We have to have a safety thing. I'm pointing out not only do they have to have that, but how are you going to actually get a safety standard when you have information in the world that is being ignored by those having the obligation and duty? It's an important concept to throw in your comments. Obligation and duty to see it and look for it and seek it out once they're told that we have this microbe gene sharing problem. You also have another thing that was brought out in another link. Radiogenetics triggers gene expression with magnetic field. I told you about the binary and trinary weapons. They did these in the 50s openly in the Bay Area, California, with their Class B transmitter. Here's a story written in 2014. Radiogenetics triggers gene expression with magnetic field. Again, a part of, I told you that these like 5G, any of these things that we see could be utilized by genetic engineering to be triggers for a weapon, a bioweapon. It could be chemical, too. There's a chemical type of problems that happen that can trigger double, like I said, trinary weapons where they have double steps that go on. In other words, the 1953 step was a binary setup where you could be inoculated by an airplane spraying stuff in the Bay Area, which they did. And that thing was inoculated in people, and it sat there dormant for a while until they turned on the Class B television transmitter up there and fired it all up, and people got sick. Now, that was a low-grade type of a disease, but there was enough that they could tell, and they could see it, they could test for it, and they know that it was off when they got people inoculated. There was a rest period, and they fired that thing up using radio energy. And so here's a story written in 2014 to confirm all that. Again, what am I using it for? Not because we know that. This is what you use to say there's things in the environment that have not been checked for and won't be checked for essentially because they want to press these chemistries and these so-called, these theoretical medical procedures on you without proper testing, because there's lots of economy behind it. Vaccine gateway drugs by design. These are terrifying stories. Again, when I look at Pharma has created its own trillion-dollar market, a generation of chronically sick children. This isn't now being written about here now, 2019. I've told you that this long time ago, and most people know about it when they see it. It's the endless process where the secondary results of taking these pharma and chemistry reactions that they then give you more chema and pharma to treat. Pharma has created its own trillion-dollar market. Yeah, I guess, at least. Why is there an epidemic of chronic illness that plagues 54% of our children today? Why do so many of our children suffer from ADHD, anaphylaxis, and severe allergies, asthma, autoimmune disease, and epilepsy, other additional chronic illnesses and neurodevelopmental disorders? What I say about the injections causing brain damage, and that scientists said brain damage would create religious beliefs, and I said the belief that you have to have absolute mandatory vaccines is evidence of brain damage. The questions remain largely unanswered and mostly ignored by the medical establishment as the numbers of children suffering from these conditions continues to rise. And so here's another article here that shows you that there's a method to the madness, actually. And then when I just ran through that other equation that the people that are insisting on you harming yourself are mentally harmed themselves, have mental brain damage, you use that. How do they check that that's not? That's what you put in your comment. How has that condition been checked so it's not a possibility? And if you get what I just saw there, you start to watch how you tie them in a knot. You make it so that the things that they have to look at is almost like an impossibility, and you show that they haven't. You say that you show that it's a possibility, and they haven't checked it. And then you look really carefully. How are they gonna check it before they make things mandatory? And if you follow what I just did there, just off the top of my head, and it just occurred to me as I said it, you see how you are in control once you start getting a handle on the subject matter of your complaint, whatever that wrong you want to make right. It's not just complaining. It's not just writing a letter. It's figuring out how to destroy their ability to continue harming you, and hopefully you're doing it for others similarly situated. That puts you in a little bit more, if I could say, moral condition, if I can say that. I know equity speaks highly of it. So it looks like a good plan to me that I can speak, and I look out to find other people that are harmed the same way who may not know it. So I just went through a whole really quick thing there as well. You go back, read this, go down and go back through the logic of what I just said the last few minutes, maybe even the last 2 minutes, and you'll see how to tie these people up with their own problem. How do you test for the fact that these people are brain damaged by the very thing they're wanting to see me harmed by? How do you know that that's not happening when I can show you there's at least a theory about it, maybe even better than the one like you call climate change, or better than your vaccine theory, which none of it's proven. I can show direct cause. Okay, so you put that in it, you have them check for it. If they don't, then you go, well, I guess ultimately, if they don't want to do it, they want to still enforce it, then you go to enjoin it, and you say they did not look at this problem. They did not look at this being a self-inflicted problem because they are incapable of making the policy, because they're the ones harmed by the very same thing they put out and agreed to. I'm sure there's a psychiatric test for it if you want to look around. Maybe they get inflicted with Munchausen syndrome and they think you're all their kids. The state, remember the parens patriae, I told you, the father, the state is the father. Now he's gone nuts. He starts to think that he's going to help his little children. It's all of y'all. And now he's got Munchausen syndrome because he's mentally defective. I don't know. I mean, I come up with this stuff, folks, and you think it's maybe you don't appreciate it, maybe you don't understand it, maybe you don't see what I'm saying. Maybe some of you pick it up and say, oh, that's kind of neat. No, these are the ways that you get at these people. Evolutionary engagement. These people mean you harm. They mean your little ones harm. You have to come with your A-plus game. But you have to come to the game, and you have to get into the A-plus mode. And we're not really prepared as a society, so I do it my way because I don't know any other thing. Just find something, folks. Find something that some small thing you can get to flex those muscles of response. As experiment on kids. You think it's going to get better? Here's more experiment on kids. You don't think they're willing to do this to your little ones? Cross-sex hormone therapy aged down to 8 in a U.S. government-funded study. Cross-sex hormones may now be given to U.S. children as young as 8 in a government-supported research program, despite the risks that these drugs can pose. But look at that one, despite the risks. And then we don't even know if that's all the risks. A Dr. Skeptical, a skeptic, there must be a religion back there somewhere, a skeptical of transitioning gender dysphoric kids has discovered. Imagine giving 8-year-old girls testosterone. Dr. Michael Laidlaw told Heritage Foundation. Heritage Foundation is another one of these groups. Be careful. My point is, all this stuff opens the can, hands you a can to open up on somebody if you put it together correctly. It doesn't matter what their agenda is. It becomes the question that can't be answered. It becomes the actual cause that can't be avoided. And then you start stopping. You begin to hold the people who think they can get away with this, because we're talking about attacking police power here. We can attack that and hold them down and constrain it, so they don't go after the ones that are not causing the problem, like we hear about the vaccine, the no measles kids back in New York. Same problem. No, you come ahead of the time. These kids, they are a third of the 4th grade. This is unbelievable, but this is going on. Laidlaw, an endocrinologist, discovered via Freedom of Information Act request. Here we go, another technique of getting information. For those of you that want to write just a letter, then you get involved with that. Go read the Freedom of Information Act. That's the federal. Otherwise, it's open records request for the state. You've got to follow the rules, but they are followable. You can do it, and you can go attack them when they try not to give you information. It's kind of interesting that way, too. You learn and exercise in a non-threatening way for you how to go about dealing with people that are trying to hide stuff from you or just not quite getting what you want. For whatever reason, because they have policies, the attorneys are behind the scenes with all their policies that you may or may not know. You figure that out. You learn how to deal with these people. The Freedom of Information Act requests the minimum age of administration of cross-sex hormones have been lowered from 13 to 8 in a large 5-year study being conducted by the Children's Hospital in Los Angeles. I mean, I don't want to, okay, enough. You can read more, you can get into who Children's Hospital is, all this stuff. It's really a fascinating, horrific view, but it's there. Experimenting on kids, it's okay, folks. I guess that's the thing I wanted to come across there. It's okay. Why Title 50 says it's okay? That means you live in the military consequence, because otherwise it's not okay. It's not okay at all. And yet, that's what these people are doing, because they're agenda-driven. And now we find this scientific report that speaks from a progressive view, which shows you that these progressive ideas are evidence of a mental damage, a brain damage. There's a physical harm that's been caused. And I would just say, I wonder if it's not all just the vaccines they've all been getting, because they're just such a good thing. If you can get how you tie this up, you at least cause the question, folks. If you're not causing that question, well, you're going to see this stuff come on you. And they're going after your little kids, the little goats that you got. They're coming after them, folks. There's no limitation. I told you this as well. The age of capacity and imposition will be dropping. I started to, when I first got on broadcast, I started to say it's going to be coming down. Well, here they got it down to 8. Do you think that anything else, when you looked at what the Vatican, the Pope said about the condition of kids at that age, do you think that there's any limit now of what atrocities are going to be put upon kids to steal away their innocence, to steal away their families, to steal and put in place these tyrants? Why? Because you're quiet against it. John Rappaport comes up now. We talk about these he calls them fascists. Now I see that they're likely brain damaged people that because of by vaccine. Little fascists in California, they passed a bill that says they're going to take away all your vaccine exemptions, and now they have to pass another bill to put it in place. Now, I'm not going to even go read more about it. These people mean you harm. They will take away all your exemptions if you believe that's all you could live by. My view on that is you just stop utilizing all the government-controlled and the government services that they need. You're going to have to take that responsibility on yourself. Otherwise, they become a brain-damaged religious fundamentalist, is essentially what will happen. And that's triggered by any number of things that's put in bodies that no scientist can tell you for sure is going on, where they do know there are there's unintended consequences, and they know all about it. But see, life is a big license, a license to commit crime just so much, and that's what they're relying on, that you're going to be silent against. Do you think it's just California? No, Washington comes up and the state Senate passes a vaccine bill to rebuke the two anti-vaxxers. Is it really anti-vaxxers, or is the state of Washington senators a bunch of brain-damaged people who want to put that harm on everybody that they've perceived from getting their presumably their vaccines? Because this is not about anti-vax. This is about biology and chemistry and gene transfer problems, and the government's not wanting most people to know is going on. That it all we don't even know it could be triggered by radio radiation. I'm not going to say microwave. It could be any frequency outside of that as well. Light, folks, could trigger this stuff. And if you don't think that's a possibility, what was it? Tetracycline causes problems when it gets into sunlight, UV. Yeah, that's a trigger. See, it's nothing that we haven't seen before. We just don't agree that it's there or that it's important enough to talk about. So Washington State's becoming one of these other. They must be the Senate, literally. And I mean, my mind starts to run pretty wild here a little bit, maybe not so wild. When they did that, and in California, if I could tie a plausible connection between religious beliefs being a brain damage, and that I can tie the fact that they don't know that vaccines have caused brain damage, because we got the information that says that it does, and I can then put that on these legislators as brain damage, I can go after them under the Constitution for incompetence, can't I? Is that evolutionary engagement, folks? Well, I don't think I've heard anybody come up with that one. Is it going to survive? You're up against a big criminal syndicate. I don't know, but it'd sure be interesting to see someone put it out there, wouldn't it? You put your dots really, really close together, and you sit inside the fact that the places they haven't tested for, and they're going to be hard-pressed to say that you don't have a plausible reasoning behind what you've done. And at least you've got the issue before the people to think about. Oh, these people may be brain damaged. We all may be brain damaged. Oh, they're all now vindictive. They want to abuse everybody. You at least produce the question. And what does that do? It starts, even so, it impliedly says these things are not safe. Even in the assertion. People have to look at it. I'm not anti-vax. I don't want to be abused by a mental defect caused by this. Here's the proof. And they say, well, it's not a proof in science. Well, there is no proof for this, isn't there? That's your problem. You don't know this, and you don't know this, and you don't know this, and these all cause trouble, and you won't look at it. You don't know that it doesn't happen. You now come at least up against their argument and make a big question that they were supposed to look past it and look at what you're saying. It's another way to get at these people. If none of you will step back and really, you want to talk about free thinking and open thinking, and then come back with an integrated plan of evolutionary engagement, this is how it starts to get done. This is how you start to do it. You have to learn what the battlefield is, as I keep telling you that. Yeah, it's a little bit of work, but it's certainly not worthy of any complaint any further once you understand that is the fact. It's just the fact. Do I like having to do it? Do I like to come here and telling you about it like this? No, but it's a fact, and it's necessary to get done. So, I mean, as I'm talking to you, my mind's going, I got another mind working on it. How would I stop this? What would I do if I had the extra time? Literally, it makes sense to me. I'd actually almost seems kind of like a fun thing. Go after these guys and tell them that they're all they have physical mental damage to want to put, to first call people names, lash out, and make vaccines mandatory in the face of all the known harms, even on the product data sheet. And we would assume, are the ones that got vaccines and those vaccines had to have caused brain damage because they hold this belief like a fundamentalist religious belief, and this scientist over here says that evidences brain damage. Can anybody put that together for themselves and go run that through and see how that flies? Boy, it can't be that far off the mark. And I know the way the dynamic of how it's supposed to be and what they're supposed, their obligation and duty to check. If they haven't checked what you're saying, they can't even answer. At least becomes a question for people to start saying, oh, wow, there is evidence. It looks like they could be doing this problem. They're the victims of this, and now they're trying to victimize me as an abuser does, as an abused does later in life when they start abusing. So moving through and on, that's a government here, your state government helping you out, and now we're looking at, almost looks like today's definition is that the state's the politicians are mentally harmed, where they are fixed in their beliefs and firm in their beliefs and can't really support it anyway, other than to just make the claim. I think we're seeing that the whole society is, again, the caucusocracy has risen to the top, folks. I don't know what else to say. This is not just you being bad. This is that you're defective. And you're defective by the things you believed were helping you that didn't. And all the things you know that weren't so. How many times have I said that? And based on that, let's go ahead and move on. I kind of swing through this pretty simple. Do you know what's in your food? Do you know what kind of fish you're getting? An interesting little Twitter thing came through. I think it's interesting for you to know. I talked about it, but now there's someone actually science. And what amazed me about this was how many people thought this was a very neat and cool thing that happened, that a university science class actually did science. How many people thought that was great? Astonished me. Because to my mind, that's what when I was going through science, that's what we did. That's how science was. You made experiments. You didn't just accept the world. You went and tested it. And you did it by, hopefully, a balanced test that were showing you some truth. Now, here was the first statement. Oh boy, I just got back the results from my class's foray in sequencing fish samples. Are you ready? They're a mind bender. And so what they did is they had their class go out and do DNA testing of the fish you buy. And the government, here, got to remember, the government's back there authorizing all this stuff about in some way or shape or form and saying and allowing the certain fish to go through as it is. There's a big disconnect, folks, because when you go through this little Twitter feed, and you actually should, you're going to find out all kinds of fancy things about what university learning about how to test for DNA in the real world, doing actual experimenting, found was in your food fish when you buy it. The fish on your plate may not be what you ordered, was an article that came up. I have another Twitter line that shows a little graph you'll find in the article, but it lays it out. It says 55% of the sea bass is mislabeled, 42% of the snapper is mislabeled, 26% of the halibut's mislabeled, 22% of the flounder is mislabeled, 21% of the sole, 8% of the lobster. How do you mislabel lobster? There it is, 8%, 7% catfish, 6% mislabeled scallops. Folks, when you order fish, what was it? I was told in that article I told you I read, they were saying something like 20-something% of the fish is off. This scientific test found out it was over like 40% average. You're not getting the fish that you order. And so here, this is all supposed to be all checked, and you're supposed to have food security, and you're supposed to buy what you got, buy what you order. When you read this stuff, you find out that when you do science, actual science, you find out that the legal world fails miserably. And you're buying into a whole lot of things that you maybe don't want to. Well, they actually have a test that when you get to the bottom, it's kind of gross. One of the tests showed that it wasn't fish at all. What was in the test sample that they did, they had the students go to a sushi bar, buy fish, bring samples home, back to the school. They supposedly ate the dinner, but brought what they bought to test whether or not they bought what they had bought what they thought they bought. And they found out 40-something% of their was wrong. It wasn't even the fish they want. A lot of it was tilapia. Now, I don't know how people can't tell what tilapia is over a nice fish steak, if you will, but But one was really kind of gross. They said that they didn't test any fish. They tested for human louse was their test sample. That's what they apparently bought and ate. Now, how that was actually the fact, I don't know. Gross enough. My thought on that was an error in sample, and I'd go check out the sampler to see if maybe that was gotten some other way. But notwithstanding that investigation, the fish on your plate may not be what you ordered, and it's again, it's all supposed to be underneath scrutiny of the agencies for what you are getting. But the companies don't care. In fact, it's all about ripping you off. You start reading this, and you wonder why. Would you even eat fish anymore? Well, you start learning. You better have a good eye on getting the whole fish. You better pay attention, because they actually found out that they're actually dyeing fish and calling it red snapper, and it's tilapia that's been dyed red, and it looks pretty close unless you know what you're looking for. And this is the world we live in. And if you don't think business is good on that, just read that story. If you don't think the government allows it and continues to allow that nonsense, then you got to read the story and get yourself re-educated. So therefore, if you think government officials are doing things in your life and for you is always on the up and up regarding, let's say, all this stuff in pharma and vaccines and making mandatory these things. Listen, they're making mandatory a vaccine that in the product data sheet says causes death. Is that a representative of the people that they serve? That would be one of my first questions as well. And I build a whole lot of these little questions to show these people must be, by this other scientist saying you firmly hold your belief, you must have brain damage. And I can show a theory. I have a theory that it was caused by your vaccines, and here's the line of proof for that. So how have you proven that you're not a cause of the problem, and you're abusing me because you're an abuser, that you're mentally defective? Again, I'm going to get on this theme because I think it's brilliant to hit them, and hit them from left field, and they don't even know what the heck to talk to you about. Because they can't test about all of it. You can bring up all, like I told you, the interim stories about it, but they'll say your fish, they'll regulate that your fish is okay, and you go to the store thinking, but you're thinking that it's good and it isn't. And you're looking right at it and you think it's what it is and it's not. Anyway, and then human louse, it's in your food, in your fish. How'd that get there? In such quantities that it overwhelmed all the fish? How did that even happen? High-fructose corn syrup may fuel colon cancer. A unanimous jury verdict in San Francisco federal court held up in favor of a California man who alleges the weed killer Roundup causes cancer. The plaintiff was a 70-year-old, controlled poison oak and weeds on his property is what he used it for, and now he's got non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And then this other case comes in and says that the fructose, and it was in its health story, high fructose corn syrup may fuel colon. Well, we know sugar can do that, and we know that also changes your body chemistry, pH. And so there's a little bit to this idea. Now we get into the baking soda, and or the other way. It depends on your body. I think if you go to apple cider vinegar or baking soda, but it doesn't matter. You have to just be aware of it. That the high fructose corn syrup may fuel colon cancer. And it does all kinds of stuff, and it's a process that they make it. They didn't even talk about it in this. I don't remember about this story, but again, this is allowed in your feed system. This is allowed just like you are allowed to buy tilapia you've been thinking you've been ordering a different, more expensive fish. I mean, I've been having trouble with some of the tuna. I don't even know that it doesn't even taste like tuna anymore. And when I read this story, I can almost actually understand why now. It's like nobody really cares and no one's paying attention. And until you're the first one that stands up, and in a company's realm, which is even worse because you have to have a whole lot of people stepping up to call it out. Now, you're going to get the same nonsense. You're not going to get, not only is your Fiat-Money dropping down in value, you're not getting what you pay for even at that point. Maybe that's another indication of when you get off of money, you get off of property, they can do about anything to you. See, if you think about that, if I give you property under an agreement to you give me something, it's not just a product quality thing. That's a fraud if you don't misrepresent what you handed me. It's a fraud anyway, but what we do is we deal with them as a consumer. Oh, they'll give us another coupon for 3 more cans of the nonsense. How many times have you done that? All right, so that it's not even geared to even correct the problem, and it's all because no one's really making for accountability. So, high fructose corn syrup fuels colon cancer. That just confirms that sugars do that, and in particular, high fructose corn syrup. Well, maybe it isn't the same chemically. Maybe there's other things involved there. And I'm reminded going back east, a couple trips running through. I don't remember now where it was. Maybe going through Nebraska, having to sit at a rail crossing, and it looked like I don't even know how many car after tank car after tank car, all saying high fructose corn sugar syrup on the side of them. Can't tell you. I remember how long we sat there and sat there, how much of this stuff is in the country. Must have been Nebraska corn country, I don't know, but they make a lot of this stuff, folks. And now we find out again they're willing to put it in your food, and it's not so good. Now, those of us who do some study, I don't touch the stuff as best as I can identify it. I've really limited all my intake from a lot of things. I try not to eat any of this stuff, and I think I'm doing pretty well by it. Now, that's all everybody's up to y'all to decide, but the point is they're willing to poison us all, folks, and you can keep buying it, keep buying into it, but more importantly, remain silent against that, too. It's not just enough to not buy. If you don't now step up and voice that opposition, they just continue. And it's becoming deadly. I don't know about colon cancer not being deadly. I guess it's operational. Do you want to go through all that? Would we talk about that they make the other story that in the kids they'll make trillions of dollars of money by infecting diseases and side issues on your little ones? Yeah, they do it to you too. This is one of those things. It's in your feed system, as I said. It's not food, it's feed. And if you think you're safe from the bureaucrats, the mongling bureaucrats of brain damage, look at this one. Chinese scientists made super monkeys with human brain genes. That didn't spur a movie a long time ago I saw. A big brain. For the first time, scientists have used gene editing techniques to make monkey brains more human-like. That's what we need. Remember I told you about that monkey's going to give an EBT card? Folks, and then remember that story, and then go trade it for some hookers? Yeah, I told you that's coming. This is, I think, the next step. The monkeys, rhesus macaques, got smarter. They had superior memories to unaltered monkeys, according to recently published research that kicked off a fiery debate among ethicists about how far scientists should be able to take genetic experimentation. And I've told you those ethicists are behind the scenes. It's all done. These people are moving forward. These scientists are moving forward on all they don't know, as I keep telling you. And we talk about the next paragraph here is a cognitive gap. The cognitive gap, the same cognitive gap that a fundamentalist religious belief system would put in you. Folks, that's what's going on here. That's the world you live in. Maybe that'll be the title of the broadcast. Everybody's coming through this failure. You're not monkey enough. They're going to make monkeys like you. Okay, so why would they even start to go down this unless they have a need for it? Did someone really like the Planet of the Apes? Is that? Is this their little sick, their sick little contribution to the world? Who knows? What would you do this for? Why, folks? What was this? Why would they go there instead of all this study they're doing there? Why wouldn't they go check for how the world interferes and interacts with the vaccines that they're making, with pharmacological interventions that they're making? Why would they go here instead of there? What are you doing to make a monkey quicker being a monkey? I think they're looking for, again, animals will have rights. Monkeys will eventually get EBT cards, as I predicted. And the first thing we found out a monkey does when it's given a reward is goes to find a hooker. That's going to be the future world, and they're all going to be bureaucrats, folks. So moving from future fantasy, not so fantasy, remember, even Dick Tracy had a watch communicator that didn't exist when you saw him in the comics that he could have today. One thing that came through the Twitter sphere, and kind of exciting in a moment, until I started to look at the questions that were developed, and I want to touch base on this just quickly to show us why we have to read in our current moment, the things that are being on us that we're trying to see through when we do take on a cause, when we do take on trying to understand things, when we're looking at wrongs out there and how people get wrong, and either to avoid that wrong, again, we learn by their mistake, or how to do things better. A story came up, and I'm moving now into our property rights. Again, if you don't have to think you have a property in yourself, these lunatics that have brain damage in the government are going to make it so you're harmed like them. We want to keep track of our property rights and how they're being harmed by them in such a way that we get the right story. And a little thing came through, kind of exciting in the moment, about the way it was described. But what I started to catch once I got into it a little bit, once I could turn some attention to it, was I was again disappointed in a group that we would tend. Some of us who look at these people see good things coming out of certain organizations, and so you'd think highly of them for doing that. But again, you got to keep a very objective eye on things. And a story went through which was very exciting in the beginning, if it was held up. And I always have these problems, so I have to keep looking. That ends up turning out to be interesting and a problem. Not a problem in that it caused a harm because of the case. It's who promoted what for what reasons, and by buying into what the promotion was before kicking back and looking at the facts, it tended to gain momentum in the wrong direction, and people took credit for things that really they shouldn't have taken credit for, and they didn't, more importantly to my mind, my eye, and my interpretation, did not educate the reader at all. So to me this is more propaganda. And I was disappointed in this as well. Maybe today's also a disappointment day. And I get over it, folks. I keep moving. I make the observations. But it did cause me some time to do some study. And it came to interesting observation, because it wasn't the story that it was, but it did give us an interesting observation on the administration of a case. Judicial Watch. Supreme Court moves to overturn conviction of a veteran fined and jailed for digging ponds on his rural Montana property. So this is important. The SCOTUS overturned a decision upholding Robertson's conviction and remanded the case so the indictment could be dismissed and the lien canceled. Then the story. Judicial Watch announced today that the Supreme Court of the United States has overturned a lower court decision affirming the conviction of Joseph Robertson, a 78-year-old veteran, now deceased, who has sentenced to prison by digging ditches on his rural Montana property to protect the area surrounding his home from wildfires. Judicial Watch had filed an amicus curiae brief, so this is just a friend of the court brief, jointly with the Allied Education Foundation, supporting Robertson and urging the Supreme Court review to reversal of the lower court decision. Robertson served 18 months in prison and died while serving probation. He was also fined $130,000, a liability inherited by his estate. The Supreme Court also remanded Robertson's conviction to the lower court, so the indictment can be dismissed and the lien can be canceled. Now I'm going to stop there. You can read more. What caught my mind was that Robertson died, or rest in peace, battling a case he should have never been attacked by through the EPA and the BLM. The reversal of a conviction of which is major news here, if it was to show wrongdoing. And that's why this would have become really big news. The problem is they mentioned that what the Judicial Watch's intention was to get this reversed based on their amicus. And so they're promoting their amicus. In fact, they give you a link to read it. And I put out immediately, I said, well, our experience with this is the attorneys don't have to sue. I didn't put the link up for it. I have to go by my memory. The attorneys don't promote the property, first of all. They don't collaterally attack those that come against the property owner. And they don't also challenge the court that the case has been brought into it. As I've told you, the incompetence of the courts themselves, these United States district courts, have no competency over Article 3 matters. And a couple of you have done the research and found that out for yourself, which puts this whole thing, again, at another level of question because of what the Supreme Court did. They remanded it back to the Ninth Circuit, which nobody I know has been able to find that it's competent over Article 3 matters either. But this is supposed to be an Article 3 matter, so I say we don't see anybody bringing these matters through a property, and these attorneys do this to us. So I'm doing this as an instructive thing. I'm already not liking what I see here, but it's exciting. We might have a guy have his criminal indictment may be overturned. His judgment is vacated. What caused my question, but also slipped prominence in my mind, was that he was deceased at this point. What I didn't know is when the decision was made, and then I found out when the decision made, and that he's deceased and has died on probation after serving the time became really what I can start to focus on as a better answer here than the amicus filed by Judicial Watch did anything. In fact, when I took the time to read the amicus, it did bring out some very important questions. But those of you that will read this, if you get the link, read for that. They don't bring up property. They actually do what I said they don't do. They didn't actually bring property, but they say that the Supreme Court has caused a problem within the constraint of the authority of the administration of the EPA, and then give their opinion on how they're supposed to treat it inside the authority of the EPA. And I'm looking at it saying, well, the EPA had no jurisdiction over this thing in the origination of it, let alone the incompetency of the court. Those of you who follow me a bit, I hope you're following me here, because this is very important to analyze. When you analyze these authorities, you start to understand how you could throw another thing on top of what I've been talking about all this broadcast in other subject matter areas. But what it turns out to be is nothing to do with the promotion of an allied education foundation teaching you a thing, or Judicial Watch. It had nothing to do, the disposition of this case has nothing to do on the vacation of a judgment exonerating the now deceased Mr. Robertson. And so it threw me into a little bit of question, because I'm looking at how do you go down and remand the case to the Ninth Circuit when you don't have the party that was charged? And that becomes part of the study, to reaffirm something I had forgotten about, but not really forgot. It's just this administrative thing. In fact, the man is dead. He's not going to be going to show up to defend himself, even by substitution, which happened in the dismissal in the order, which you can read. And it's very short. That's what caused another question. There was no opinion here. The motion to substitute Kerry Robertson, authorized representative, as petitioner in the place of Joseph D. Robertson, deceased, is granted. The petition for writ of certiorari is granted. The judgment is vacated, and the case is remanded to a United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit for consideration of the question whether the case is moot. That's it. No opinion, no nothing. And so I'm looking at this after I read with my mind of, well, the amicus did something, and trying to figure out how could an amicus, a friend of the court, advisory give the court any direction. And what was this promotion, again, by Judicial Watch? And I had to just cut all that out and go back and say, well, what's the law here? Let's go back to the summary disposition. You have to understand what you're dealing with in all this. In this case, when it works out, when the man was deceased, it's an interesting, and you can almost hug justice, if you will, to understand what justice is. It doesn't talk to the fact that they've subverted it all, but it does speak to something of the dynamic. When the gentleman was charged, and they didn't produce the property, and they didn't invoke the trust obligations of the court, and they didn't do anything of the things that I suggest you need to do to start with before this gets going, and before the case even gets started in the record, as I tell you, this gentleman got pulled in. He was mistrialed the first time. They charged him again. They got their conviction the second time. He timely appeals on what's called an appeal of right. Because when he arraigned, the government undertook to give him a final determination of guilt or innocence, to adjudicate to a determination of guilt or innocence, and he died on the way to that decision through the appeal of right. The government could not perform on its undertaking at the time that he arraigned into that jurisdiction. And because the final adjudication of guilt or innocence is now made impossible, the judgment that was made by it is not pursuant to justice. And so there's an administrative condition that goes on. Why this summary disposition is so summary and without decision, it's just a stepping back of the whole process that, similar to what you'd find in UCC, which I thought maybe be going on because of the judgment. The UCC, you have to undo the thing in reverse order of how it was done. It was going back through the channel. But that's a different reason. This is simply because the government could not provide the justice it promised. And so they have to undo this thing all the way to the beginning, which gets rid of the judgment because it's not based in judgment. The lien has to fail from which that came. This now goes to the Ninth Circuit, and then you would think, well, why would they have to go to the Ninth Circuit if the case is moot? Well, moot cases, M-O-O-T, not mute, but moot cases, may have a continuing public interest, which the Ninth Circuit will now review for, and that's the question that was sent to therefore. They have to undo this thing, but there may be a continuing public interest without the deceased party, without Mr. Robertson. Well, Miss Robinson here now, as the song tits my mind to say, has now been replaced. That's probably the estate, and the estate can't suffer on an injustice. It goes to the Ninth Circuit for a continuing public interest question review, and then from there, likely it will go back down for dismissal. Okay, so the dismissal beyond the indictment, as if nothing happened here. Nothing. Not even what we thought initially, which looked like it was on the simple vacation of a judgment, would be you would think that there was wrongdoing by the agency or government agencies, BLM and or EPA. In fact, this comes down to when it does it like this, there is no guilt, innocence, or wrongdoing determined. There is no merits determined at all. And so I felt, once I realized all that was going on, and I realized the reasoning behind this, that the government did not fulfill what it undertook to provide, the justice by final adjudication of guilt or innocence, this had nothing to do with what the promotion of Judicial Watch was. And again, a great disappointment to me. They didn't need to do it that way. I don't know these people. I just know they do some good work. But we have to be careful wherever we go. And I took some time on this. I didn't want to I took a little bit of time here, but you have to understand there are exactnesses to this. There are formalities. You don't have to get all blown out by it, or you don't have to just turn your say it's too much. It's how things work out. Another disappointment that I was finding, and it just kind of shed some ill light, I'll say, on a whole bunch of stuff that I see, and this references where I was listening to the restatement of this was on a video. Also a link was given to me. Totally respectable guy doing what he thinks is going on, telling you about this condition. But within the context of this stating this condition of the vacation, he didn't understand it anyway either. He had some questions about it, but then he imposed what he believed was going on. It must have been the Trump administration that was causing the protection. It must be this inside the government that does this. It might be this over here. And then he brings up QAnon. It must be some of this as a side story about this whole thing, relative to something else. And I saw the convolution and ignorance of what's really going on. In the ignorance of that, and trying to force lots of things in, people in the comments were responding about how it made sense. It actually made no sense at all. It was actually irrelevant. All of that was irrelevant. It was, he tries to tie the Q had anything to do with that at all in another context about how this is all working. It'll work out. Go to the plan. All this nonsense I'm hearing. All based on a completely lack of... This is an older guy, too, folks. We're supposed to know this stuff by the time we get here. That we should give you a clue how far off the game we are and how far ahead these other guys are. That we start putting all our eggs in the basket that someone's coming as a savior in the future instead of realizing this guy died after spending 18 months in jail, and it came to no end because he died, and we didn't get the proof because the attorneys are still sitting there not doing what they're supposed to do, promoting a Judicial Watch, promoting a brief, an amicus that did not promote all this, that the agencies are still sitting there to do their harm. And my feeling, and I hope it doesn't happen, it could happen, I guess there's a choice, My feeling is that these agencies, they're free to go after that estate again. Actually, not the estate. They'll go after the new replaced Carrie Robinson if she's entitled to the property, and they'll attack those people again. And so we can believe and buy into all this QAnonsense or what people's ignorance are saying and what they believe is going on by some savior coming out of the White House or wherever it's coming from, or we can understand how that's us. We have our own mental dysfunction on this. We have to cut through that. We have to get to the bottom of the actual thing that's going on and work from there and actually do some work from there. Not just let it go, not let others talk for us, not let others think that others are doing things for us. And so, I don't know what more to say. I was fascinated about most of the how this worked out. I understood how I was able to get back to the answer, but I don't keep this stuff in my mind unless it's important. This issue about justice, what justice is, came important. I'm not saying that the courts give justice. That's their excuse. What justice is the adjudication finally to guilt or innocence. Now, there may, there's a big failure in that system. I told you they're incompetent. That the Ninth Circuit returns this, remands it to an incompetent court of appeal is a problem. So be careful and don't say I'm agreeing that all this is correct even so. What I'm saying is that to overblow what's going on, to take credit for something that you can't, and then give to somebody else like there's some underlying plan about how this all worked to protect this guy, absolutely is not the story. But we do learn about how to defeat justice, don't we? We just have to die. So, going over now to what our rights are. Our right of appeal is, and the right to win would be to die and then get rid of the indictment. That's one way to do this. So, that's just a whole different take on this if you go think that one through. That's always an option, I suppose, and I wondered a little bit about that. But this is what they send you to. The guy died in probation defending a property that should have never been attacked. That's not justice. The Supreme Court only looked at the fact that they could not provide the judicial review, and they claim that would be justice. I can tell you it couldn't have been with even the amicus I saw, because the man was attacked on his property that the government has no right to attack him on. That's injustice on its face, and they didn't cite that. And so I look at this also totally different. I'm not saying I agree with what they did. I'm saying that's what they do. And you have to understand that so you don't get lulled into being told that there's some savior out there, that these people are doing it completely right for you, or in this case, at all right for you if you find yourself in that condition. Or you find yourself in that condition and you follow what they say that you need to do. Will walk you right into these traps I'm trying to explain to you to avoid. Taking you right out of your rights, right out of what you understand as your rights and how to assert them more properly. And that's only to my limitation. You may find other places I haven't even seen. I don't even know that. Like, I don't know what I don't know kind of thing. We all don't. But I can see what I do know is not working right. And on the heels, I didn't know that I had this story up, but on the heels of knowing your rights and being threatened, if you have a right to assert, you can push it back. As I was telling you, our chairman of the Mining District, after we filed a paper, it was actually a cease and desist and a show cause to the I'm trying to remember how we did that, what that paperwork did, to Jules, Secretary of Interior Jules. We said, show how you're not committing treason here. Otherwise, we're going to have to invoke our state right to arrest you. And that's the FBI came attacked our chairman to say, you don't have a right to do that. And then he showed him the law. All of a sudden, the story seemed to change. So you have to know your rights, so you don't get bowled over by what looks like authority, which is not. I don't even know if it's authorita anymore. Is where I look. It's just criminals in suits. It's possibly brain damaged people because they believe so. They believe in their cause so much it's become a religion. Just tie that report that I talked to an hour and a half ago. Tie that into this. What are we really dealing with in people? We may not even really know more than it's brain damage. Did they get I mean, I'm almost wondering, have you ever had Pharma taken any drugs and take vaccines? And when they said yes, I said, have you been checked for brain damage? But anyway, so your rights, how do you assert them? Where's accountability? I'm not saying to go out and do this because I've done a study. It's very much more difficult than what you can just roll off your lips. But this thing down on the border and the citizens' arrest, not knowing your rights, not enforcing them, and those that step up to do get accosted, is part of part of the minefield. Knowing what the thing happened in the Supreme Court relative to vacating a judgment, thinking that it was actually the guy being exonerated, finding out, no, that's just the escape from a judgment of the system, and I would say absolutely wrongly imposed upon a man who's supposed to be settled and peaceful in his land. But it cannot be justice. So they were actually promoting that it would be, as if it went to the Supreme Court and would have been returned if the guy had lived. It's another problem. So you have to understand what the rights are and what the administrative processes are and what they're telling you, what they're selling to you. Citizens arrest or kidnapping. U.S. militias told to stand down after catching 300 migrants came up here. And my next tab is, again, we have to know what we're looking at. We can't just be following what other people say. I want to point out, this title here was perfect, Citizens Arrest or Kidnapping. That is an important question. You have to go to your state, and you have to look and see what your right of citizens arrest is. If you have that, and you should, and you look and see what the standard is, it's written down, don't disregard it. That's your protection, because you get to do it too, and you stay within that, you can't be arrested. That's what we did. We had the chairman do. Again, this is all prepared. When we got the phone call, I did some quick research before there was a meeting. I handed that off to the chairman when he went to meet the FBI agents who were all threatening and wanted to tell how much of a criminal he was, until he showed him the law that we had developed pretty quickly to show him that they were out of line and they were actually aiding and abetting the treason that they were calling on us to not arrest. So we have a government working against our better interests in the law. I don't know what to say about that. We're doing our best, folks. But citizens arrest is an interesting statement to come up into the law right now, relative also to the border condition. The border condition is irrelevant to that right. All the stories want to make you focus on things other than that. But you have to look at your states. If we want to bring accountability, and folks, I'm not telling you to go do this. You better do some heavy research. They've got this thing set up that you will have to make agreements with the officials on how this will work before you affect it. So you get a written document that shows the exact way you're to do this. Otherwise, it is such a gaping hole that they'll use against you that you really do not want to get involved with it. From the state's government side and from the one who they will then give the right to pummel you when they claim that you did it wrong when you don't have a protection. This could be as simple as getting a letter. We've tried to get a letter. You won't get a letter from, let's say, the local sheriff on agreement of what citizens arrest constitutes and how to effect it and who the magistrate is you're going to send these people to if you take them anywhere, or even you're holding. Citizens arrest or kidnapping, you'll read these stories and you'll realize if the people didn't go anywhere and the people who are holding them have a crime that they believe have happened within the statutory guideline of what a crime is for citizens arrest, they will be protected. If those people were moved anywhere, likely the government would hit them with kidnapping. That's why you have to have where you call, who goes to, and how these people be handled. In this case, you're hearing about the leader being taken down for being a felon with a gun. Somehow in the story they say he's going to get that taken care of. It's not a problem. Okay, fine. What you're hearing here is the concept of citizen arrest, that they don't want you to know that we all have the accountability power if we were to exercise it. What I need to tell you is you have to know that they build a trap area around that you'll have to qualify exactly how to execute one of those if we ever get to the point our people are strong enough to start arresting the felonies and things like that they see around them. We're so far from that. I rarely talk about it, but while it's in the news, I want you to hear about it. And so maybe that's what we'll hold off right there. Go to your state statutes, read what citizens arrest is. Do not be empowered that because it says it there, you get to go out and do it. It's kind of like the use of force relative to the use of a gun. You will be prosecuted for it, and you better have the right answers, and you better hope the jury is educated and that will understand that your right to exercise it was within the law, because they test everything when it comes to you doing it. Understand that what's going on right now is they're saying they dislike that the militia is doing. They claim by the articles it's illegal, but no one's arrested. And this guy that they just arrested apparently won't be arrested for making a false citizen's arrest. That's done by the one that you falsely arrest. And I haven't even really researched whether or not a illegal immigrant can file charges that way. I don't know. Maybe under the commerce NAFTA that's been updated, maybe that way. But I don't know if they can actually get you. And they're not getting anybody. They're not arresting people for making a citizen's arrest. They're just saying that they dislike it. And they want to make it sound like you're some unruly mob when you do so. I'm saying go to your local statutes, because that's what the rule is. That's the objective basis. Understand what that's saying. And then I'm saying additionally, make sure you have written documentation on what happens from the very point that you arrest somebody. And this is not just the border issue. This is anywhere in the country. And then you get an agreement on what you're supposed to do step by step. And typically, if you read the rules, you have to go to a judge and a magistrate. There's supposed to be one on call 24 hours a day. You make sure where that's going to be if you have to move somebody. Make sure that you understand that remedy before you do it, and they're trying to hide that you have the right to it. Thank you for listening today. I hope something I said informative and inspires you to move on forward and stop that wrong you need to make right and build a bigger power, exercise those muscles. Grimmer, thank you for what you do at reallibertymedia.com and giving us the opportunity to come here, at least myself, every week to do this, and everybody else is doing syndicating the broadcast or can get the broadcast syndicated. You can ask about that, folks. Get the word out. I'll use the rebroadcast, a repost, a reproduction. Thank you for letting the word out here about this, what I'm trying to say, and get people to do and understand better than just the opinions out there. Get down to the black and white on what's really doing. I'll be with you next week. Tech Diffs or Nature Will.
Well, that's another lesson. I hope with today's information you can take it to those that misbehave. From behind the woodshed, leaving his mark on the beast, this is Hal Anthony. Till next time, journey with purpose.
Opening up a can of whoop-ass feels like.
Son, you just opened a whole case of whoop-ass.